So architecture testing is the process of testing an application system-wide. In other words, this is a holistic view of the system, as opposed to the integration testing or unit testing, which focus on a smaller subset of the system. One larger component of architecture testing is usability testing. This involves evaluating the product from the user's perspective, usually by observing representative users interact with the system. The focus of our lesson this week will be to conduct a good usability study. So this week for the reading section, there's going to be two parts of this. One is your normal reading and quiz, and then the next part is to select a project for this week's lab. So let's focus on that second part here. So our lab this week will be to conduct a simple usability test. In order to do this, it is necessary to find an application that we can work with. So with your partners, you're going to select a mobile application that everyone can put on their phone. This application should not be mainstream. The goal is that the average person will not have the experience working with the application. For an example, Instagram would not be an appropriate choice. However, Mountain Project, an application for rock climbers, might be. So our lab this week will be to create a usability plan, sometimes called a usability test plan or even a usability study plan. Using the mobile application you and your partners previously selected, create a usability plan. This will be accomplished by selecting a feature which you would like to study. List a set of instructions you would like the user to follow, and testing the plan with a friend to make sure that it works as expected. So let's go over a few things about usability testing that might be beneficial for you. So what is exactly usability testing? So essentially, usability testing refers to evaluating a product or service by testing it with representative users. Typically, during a test, participants will try to complete typical tasks while observers watch, listen, and take notes. The goal is to identify any usability problems, collect quantitative and qualitative data, and determine the participant's satisfaction with the product. So this can be done many different ways. You can literally be sitting next to the person in a room. You could be recording them on some type of device. Maybe they are doing it remotely and you're recording the entire session with a specific kind of application. It could get pretty technical, maybe even have technology that keeps track of their eye movement and their click movement and all this other stuff. So it can get pretty technical as well, but it doesn't have to be. So to run an effective usability test, you need to develop a solid test plan, recruit participants, and then analyze and report your findings. So that's essentially what we'll be doing this week. So keep in mind that this is going to be very basic. You will have another class if you take human-computer interactions that will go into more detail with this. So let's talk a little bit more about when would you actually go about doing usability testing. So oftentimes when people think of usability testing, individuals think of a user using the application they are building. And this is often the case a lot of times, but that doesn't have to be the case. You can actually start this from the very beginning of the project. So maybe you're just coming up with sketches and you have some ideas on a piece of paper and you want your users to give you feedback about specific parts of your design, of your sketches. Very low, like these would be like very low just design documents. So not high fidelity at all. So you can get feedback from early on in the process. Maybe you're building prototypes out and you want users to interact with your prototypes. That's also a great way to get your user feedback. And that's very beneficial to have in the beginning, and we'll kind of go over that in just a moment. So let's jump into the benefits. So from the very beginning, as I mentioned, usability testing lets the design and development team identify problems before they are coded. The earlier issues are identified and fixed. The less expensive the fixes will be in terms of both staff time and possible impact to the schedule, as well as cost. So if you think about it in this situation, if you're just doing some sketches or you're even just working on designs or even prototypes and you find issues during your usability testing with any of those, that's going to be a lot cheaper to get or to fix because it's a lot easier to make a change in a simple design tool such as Figma, as well as time, because obviously it's going to be quicker to fix those issues, which also correlates to cost, as I just mentioned. So during a usability test, you will, one, learn if participants are able to complete specific tasks successfully and to identify how long it takes to complete a specific task. You'll find out how satisfied participants are with your website or other product. You'll identify changes required to improve user performance and satisfaction, and analyze the performance to see if it meets your usability objectives. So how can we go about conducting usability tests? There are many different ways to conduct usability tests, but it all starts with a plan. And that's what we'll be starting off with this week. So let's go over the instructions a little bit in more detail here. So you have identified your application. So there's going to be several things that you need to do first. First, you need to select a relevant feature. So let's talk about this one a little bit more. So it says, with your partner, select a task, feature, or activity or process which has a moderate degree of complexity. You're looking for an action that has about a dozen steps and more than one screen. For an example, consider Instagram. An appropriate feature will be the enrollment process. This will consist of new users adding a username and password to the system so that the user can have access to Instagram's content. So this will probably be the bulk of the work for this specific assignment. So probably the first thing you need to consider is the users for the application that you will be testing. So depending on your application, this may vary. So if you're testing the Instagram enrollment process as the instructions stated, you will have a different demographic of users, and that information is going to be valuable for you. So for an example, if you're not familiar with what a demographic is, you'll have different age groups. So you'll have, I don't know, 13 to 18-year-olds, all the way up to, maybe 65 plus that will be enrolling in your Instagram application. So with that being said, there's going to be other things to consider, like gender, users from different countries, users that speak different languages. So another important one would be, like, what is this user going to be using the application for? So is this going to be for a business purpose, or is it personal? So just some ideas, throwing those out there for the enrollment feature. So with that being said, each of these are key ways to identify the users and really get to know them. As you do so, it will assist you in what you need to test for. So one thing that might benefit you is to come up with a hypothesis with what you think the user will do depending on the different users you have identified. And then you'll come up with instructions to test that hypothesis. For an example, if we're talking about the enrollment feature of Instagram, maybe one of your hypotheses is the following. You have a 65-year-old male that will type password for their password. So why would you have this hypothesis? So maybe for the enrollment form, it has enter password as for the password section for that specific form. And you expect that the 65-year-old will just enter password because that's what the instructions state, right? And why would this be important to you? So you may be worried about the users being targeted by scammers or other security issues there, because you know that actually password is one of the most commonly used passwords. So you want to prevent your users from using that specific password, and you want to give clear instructions on how to create their password. So you might be wrong with that hypothesis, you might be right. So you'll conduct a usability test to test that. So that kind of thinking there will have an impact on what you do going forward. So if you go back and you test these 65-year-old males, and yeah, a lot of them do enter password, then you know, okay, this is something we have to focus on and change. Okay? If they don't, and they just enter the password as you would expect them to, then maybe you don't have to change anything on that form. It's good. So with that being said, so you've identified this hypothesis, and then you'll go about writing instructions that will prompt them to enroll and watch, and then you'll watch them and listen to them as they fill out the enrollment form. You might have them speak out loud as they go about conducting this specific test, and just so they can speak their mind and say why they're doing what they're doing, so you have a better understanding of what they're doing and what their thinking is. So with that being said, they also might run into roadblocks. So them just speaking out loud and you visually being able to see them as well will help you to identify exactly where in the roadblock that might be causing the issue, or where in the process might be causing the issue. And this is important. You don't really want to interrupt them. You want them to show those frustrations. You want to see that. That's valuable information. So if someone cannot figure out something, just let them struggle for a bit. You might step in only if they just completely say, I can't figure this out. I give up. Some might even just quit at that point because they're done. They're so frustrated with it that they just might just quit. So, and this is just valuable information. So let me give you an example of this actually. So there was a usability test conducted at a company, and the product manager was the one conducting the test. So they had some users in, and they were conducting it. They were video recording them in a separate room, and they were watching them through monitors. So with that being said, they did the test. She got her feedback that she wanted, and then she went to a meeting. And in this meeting, they're supposed to go over the usability test, but this specific group didn't really care too much about usability testing. They kind of thought it was a waste of time, and even though that's not the case. So, and she had some really good feedback to give that group. So she got to the meeting, patiently waited throughout the meeting time, and towards the end, everyone was like, okay, we're done. She's like, no, I have my usability testings, and they kind of just shrugged it off, and said, no, you're fine. She got up and like slammed the door and said, no, sit down. She was prepared for this. She had a little clip, like 10 to 15 seconds long, of the specific user conducting the feature that they were testing. Or she put up her laptop, hooked it up to the presentation, and pressed play. And it was of a guy getting so frustrated that he started throwing things. And obviously that caught their attention, right? So they're like, okay, we'll listen to this. That was interesting. What's going on here? So she then went about presenting the results of the usability test. And it was very clear at that point that that feature needed to be reworked. It was so frustrating for the users. And so if she wouldn't have stepped in and done that, that feature probably would have rolled out to production and would have been there in front of the users. So this was just one extreme example of usability testing, but it just goes to show that you can't assume that the users will behave as you expect. They will have valuable feedback to give you. So for the rest of the instructions, it mentions to identify your instructions, which I think we kind of went over that. So just be detailed enough to where it leads the user to do the task that you want. But don't be too detailed. For an example, for the enrollment process on Instagram, you'll just say, get to the enrollment form and then fill out the form and go from there. And then you'll just watch them do that. The next part is to then test your plan. So with a friend or family member or roommate, you're going to test your usability plan. So this is just a way for you to get feedback before you actually go to your users. So just to make sure that your plan is working the way that you would expect, and it's not too detailed, and it has just enough detail to get you the results that you will be seeking for. So once you come up with your usability plan, next you are actually going to do the usability study. You're going to conduct the study. So each member of the team will interview 3 people. Detailed data from these interviews will be collected and compiled into a single report. Like I mentioned, depending on how you conduct these interviews, you have different tools that you can use. You can interview them and video record them. You can just sit down and watch them and just take very detailed notes. You can do both. I would highly suggest that. The combination of this data should address the question, will the average user be able to accomplish the task that the feature was designed to facilitate? The question should be answered with data collected during the study. Make sure that all your conclusions are fully supported by collected data. So you just want to base it off the facts, essentially. So you'll collect all this data, you'll collect your recordings, share it with your team, and then you'll come up with a single report just to compile all this data together. You don't necessarily have to share the videos, for an example, for this report, but you'd want to give a good enough detail of what happened during the studies and what the outcomes were. So it would be a good idea to collect that data and have it in a central location in case someone in your group, or in this case someone in your organization, wants to view that data and view those recordings. But it's just a single report just to kind of gather all the feedback and for you to present your results. And that is it for this week. Thank you.
That's all. I shouldn't have had those artichoke poppers.